Napoleon's invasion of Russia is one of the most famous military disasters in history. His Grand Army, which had successfully conquered much of Europe, was nearly wiped out during its foray into Russia in 1812. The campaign is infamous for being one of the greatest failures of all time. But Napoleon's disastrous Russian campaign was only one battle in an incredibly long and bloody war. And that war would be over within just 2 years. So how did Napoleon go from conquering most of Europe to losing most of his army in Russia to returning to power in France in just a few short years? It all started with this guy, this very short guy. At just 4 feet 11 inches, Napoleon Bonaparte was one of the shortest French presidents in history. That is, of course, until he wasn't the president anymore and became the first emperor of France in over 100 years. But despite his small stature, Napoleon's ambitions were far from small. He rose through the ranks of the French military at an incredible pace. And when he seized power in a coup d'etat in 1799, he quickly set about conquering much of Europe. By 1812, he had conquered pretty much all of Western Europe. Only Britain, Portugal, and Sweden remained outside of his control. His ambitious plans for world domination, however, would have to wait as trouble was brewing in Russia. Things were not going well between Napoleon and Tsar Alexander I of Russia. For years, they had been in a tense standoff. In 1804, the two leaders declared war on each other. They had clashed over various territorial disputes in Europe, and Napoleon had grown tired of Alexander's resistance to his hegemony over the continent. But what made things worse was the growing threat posed by the British Royal Navy. Britain and Russia had formed an alliance, and Napoleon wanted to crush them both. But before taking on Britain, Napoleon knew he needed to deal with Russia. With Western Europe under his thumb, Napoleon's next target was obvious: Russia. In early June 1812, Napoleon's army crossed the Niemen River and began its advance into Russia. It was one of the largest armies ever assembled. At over 600,000 strong, it consisted of infantry, cavalry, and artillery. This grand army marched deep into Russia, capturing city after city. Despite fierce Russian resistance, Napoleon's forces rolled forward. They fought their way through Vitebsk, Smolensk, and other cities. The grand army was too powerful to stop. As the French advanced further into Russia, they encountered more and more scorched earth tactics. As the Russians retreated, they burned their crops and livestock, denying the French any real opportunity to resupply. This scorched earth strategy was a brilliant tactic used by the Russians to slow down the French advance. But the Russians were still putting up fierce resistance. Cities were burning to the ground and the French casualties were mounting. But finally, on September 7, 1812, the French entered Moscow. But instead of finding the victory they expected, they found a ghost town. The Russians had abandoned the city and left behind a trap for the French. As winter approached, the French were stuck in a city full of booby traps with no food or supplies. Many French soldiers froze to death that winter. The Grand Army had failed to capture Moscow, and Napoleon was forced to retreat back to France. Out of the 600,000 men who had crossed into Russia, only 100,000 made it back. Of those 100,000, many were wounded or sick. Russia had nearly wiped out Napoleon's army. Back in France, Napoleon tried to regroup and recover from the disaster, but his problems were far from over. The other European powers, sensing weakness in the French, had formed a coalition against him. There was the Russian Empire, the British Empire, the Swedish, Danish, Prussian, and Austrian empires, as well as a number of smaller German states. Napoleon was once again at war. But now, weakened by the disaster in Russia, Napoleon was on the defensive. The war was a stark contrast to the previous years when he had been the aggressor. Now he was desperately trying to hold on to his empire as the rest of Europe sought to destroy it. In the span of just a few years, the tide had completely turned. In 1813, the coalition invaded France. Napoleon desperately tried to stop them, but his enemies were too strong. On October 19, 1813, Napoleon was forced to flee the battlefield near Leipzig as Allied troops closed in. With his army defeated, Napoleon abdicated the throne and was exiled to the island of Elba off the coast of Italy. Once again, Napoleon was a deposed leader, but this wouldn't last long. Just 6 months later, Napoleon escaped from exile and returned to Paris. But this time he had absolutely no chance. The European powers were ready for him. Within a week of his return to power, he was defeated and sent into exile once again. This time he was sent to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. There he spent the remainder of his life, far from the power and glory of the French throne. Napoleon died on May 5, 1821. At age 51, he had been one of the most powerful and feared men in Europe for over 2 decades, but his legacy was one of destruction and defeat. The Napoleonic Wars had killed millions and devastated Europe. But despite all of his failures, Napoleon's story is one of ambition and determination. He rose from humble beginnings to become the most powerful man in Europe. And though he ultimately failed in his goal of world domination, he left a lasting impact on the continent. Napoleon's conquests helped to spread the ideals of the French Revolution throughout Europe, and he is considered one of the architects of modern Europe. So why should you care about Napoleon today? Well, Napoleon may be gone, but his legacy lives on. Many of the conflicts we see today are rooted in the same tensions that led to the Napoleonic Wars, and the ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity that Napoleon championed continue to inspire people around the world. Napoleon was a flawed but brilliant leader, a man who accomplished great things but also caused great suffering. But in the end, he was a man of the people, a man who was willing to fight for the rights of ordinary citizens against the privileged class. And in a world where power often corrupts, Napoleon's story is a reminder that even the greatest leaders can fall. So what do you think? Is Napoleon a hero or a villain? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe so that I can keep making more of them. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. While Napoleon's legacy may be a bit complicated, there's one thing that's for sure: his impact on world history is undeniable. From his early days as a military leader to his final exile on St. Helena, Napoleon's life was full of adventure, intrigue, and power struggles. And though he may have ultimately lost the battle against the coalition, his contributions to the development of modern Europe are undeniable. But what do you think? Do you view Napoleon as a hero or a villain? And which battles do you think were the most pivotal moments in his rise and fall? Let us know your thoughts below. Also, if you want to learn more about some of the lesser-known aspects of Napoleon's life, and don't forget, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more historical tales. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.